Welcome to Paranormal UK Radio. Our guest tonight is Robin Foy, coming all the way from Spain. Now, Robin was involved in an experiment called the Scole Experiment, but I'm not going to ruin it for everybody. I'm not going to tell anybody about it. I'm going to let Robin do that. Hello, Robin.
Hi there.
Hi.
Robin, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Yeah, nice to be here.
Yeah, hello there, sir. So good to talk with you.
Yeah, and you.
Now, Robin, the Scole Experiment, there's a lot of people in the paranormal community who know about it, and a lot of the newer generation here that only knows what they've seen on these current crop of television shows. I was wondering if you could just take a moment to tell our listeners, what was the Scole Experiment, and how did that come about?
Well, personally, my wife and I have been involved in psychic research for 43 years. And in that time, we've both been involved in various circles to develop physical phenomena. And I should explain the difference between mediumship. Firstly, mental mediumship is mediumship where a medium is able to see, which is clairvoyance, hear, which is clairaudience, or sense, which is clairsentience, a spirit personality. Nobody else who is present is able to do that, but the medium then passes on what they can see, hear and sense to the sitter. Where physical mediumship is concerned, it's extremely rare these days, and there aren't too many physical mediums around, although there are quite a few of them developing at the moment. But in that case, everybody who is present can see and can hear and can experience what's going on. So in other words, physical mediumship is real. The phenomena that occurs through physical mediumship is quite outstanding. And generally speaking, in the past, everything to do with physical mediumship, it's been accepted that the only way to sort of get phenomena using or by getting physical mediumship is to do it by the use of ectoplasm, the substance that everybody talks about, but not too many people have seen. Fortunately, we have. But in our case, for years we were involved in working with physical mediums who had ectoplasm, and we've been very, very privileged to sit with about a dozen or up to 15 actually physical mediums over the years who've been quite superb, and we've witnessed fully materialized spirit beings, voices coming out of midair, which is known as independent voice. And we've run several of our own circles at home. I've actually started a number of groups and a number of organizations. The one that really got going was in 1990, where I started an organization called the Noah's Ark Society. And that was brought about in order to literally save physical mediumship from becoming totally, having disappeared totally. And during the course of that, went on for about 4 years. We had physical mediums with members of our Noah's Ark Society witnessing demonstrations by them. And they witnessed some great stuff. But again, we were talking about working with ectoplasm with the mediums we worked with. And then in 1992, end of 1992, beginning of 1993, we moved to a little village, which is called Scole, Scole, and that's actually situated in East Anglia in the United Kingdom, right on the borders of Norfolk and Suffolk. There was a farmhouse there that came up for rental at the time we were looking, and my wife Sandra had been told many, many years before about this place that wonderful things would happen here. And the medium who had spoken to her some 20, 30 years previously told her that we would actually get sort of wondrous things, virtually treasure of some sort, but meaning by that things that sort of were really quite fantastic. And when we moved to this place, we started another circle in order to develop physical mediumship. And we started with 7 people in this group, most of whom we'd actually met through the Noah's Ark Society. And these 7 people sat together from about December in 1992.
Robin, sorry,
yeah.
Was there a reason for 7 people, or was it just that it happened to be 7 people?
It just happened to be that the number that we contacted us. We've found since working in this group, excuse me, that the best number for really good phenomena is probably 6 or 4. And eventually, through natural sort of
processes
leaving the group, we ended up with 4, and that's when we got the best phenomena. But the very first phenomena in that group did start in May in 1993, when we actually started. We didn't know at that stage that we were working in a different way, but we had put it out to our spirit team. We had a spirit team that we got in touch with and worked with us constantly for the 5 years of the experiment. And this spirit team actually were able to sort of move what's known as a trumpet, which is something that is used during most physical seances. And what it is really is just a sort of tin megaphone that's sort of about 2 feet long, sort of narrow at one end and wide at the other. And it's something that's always been assumed that spirit.
That's been going for quite some time, hasn't it? Because my grandfather used to go to sessions where he called it trumpet calling.
Yeah.
To try and contact my grandmother.
Yeah. And this actually, generally speaking, in a physical circle would levitate, and the spirit people, levitate independently, and the spirit people could actually speak through this trumpet. But in our case, they moved it first 1 week in May in 1993, and it fell off the table. The following week, it sort of made a more controlled descent onto the ground, and then we got very little after that until the October of that year. But then we had 2 of our people in the group become deep trance mediums. That developed very, very quickly, and we soon made contact with all the members of our spirit team, some of whom were actually quite well known in the end. And we worked with them very much in conjunction with them, in liaison with them, and we cooperated together, them and us, and generally speaking, when they asked us, they never demanded anything, but when they asked us if we would mind them trying to get a particular type of phenomena, then basically we always agreed with them. And because, we sort of worked well with them, everything they said they wanted to get, we got in the end, and it was very, very good. We had some fantastic phenomena over 5 years until 1998.
And spirit team, these are your helpers from the other side?
Yes, inside, yeah.
Okay.
So what brought the experiment to an end in 1998?
Well, the spirit team were working in a brand new way, and I should explain that to you, how they were working. It was not done with ectoplasm. It was a very pioneering experiment and a unique experiment, because they were actually experimenting with producing phenomena just through 3 different types of energy that they mixed together. These 3 types of energy, it turned actually, when it was mixed together, into what they called a creative energy, and that was stored in a glass dome which stood on our central table, and they were able to draw from that creative energy to produce the phenomena that we all wanted, them and us. There were 3 different types of energy. First and foremost, there was energy that the spirit team brought with them from the spirit world, so that was spirit energy. Secondly, there was the spiritual energy that they extracted from us, the sitters, there on the occasion. And thirdly, there was normal, quite natural energy that exists in certain geographical locations all around the world. And it's in the form of spirals or columns, and is generally in a particular geographical area. But if you're working to try and develop phenomena, these spirals can actually be drawn to you, so that you end up with a sort of spiral through the property that you're working in, which they can then use together with the other two types of energy and turn into this creative energy.
And Mr. Foy, these energies, they responded to your thoughts, correct? They reacted to the emotions that the group was injecting into them, correct?
Yeah, they did, but mostly they were actually being used by the spirit team. They were the engineers, if you like, and we were sort of the other end of the line.
I see. A working man's knowledge of ectoplasm. We hear this term all the time. It's popular in motion pictures and things of that nature. But looking back at the idea of Victorian seances and the photographs that was taking of ectoplasm, how would you define ectoplasm for a common man? Put it in easy terms for the layman to understand.
Well, it's a substance that is sort of partially liquid. It's very much fluid, but it's something that is produced generally from internally from the medium, but very often, again, spiritual energy is drawn from the sitters into the medium, into this sort of mix, and as it comes out, it sort of resembles a sort of type of linen or I mean, it also looks a little bit like cotton wool. It moves all over the place, quite honestly. And if you see a demonstration of it, it's quite striking to see this sort of coming from a medium. I think the best I've ever sort of seen on this is a superb medium who lives in Germany at the moment, a guy called Kai Muga, and his demonstrations of ectoplasm are quite superb. But it can be formed into a facsimile of a human personality, and generally speaking, this can be done by spirit people who form this sort of a body as such out of this ectoplasm, which is sort of in a cloud, if you like, but it has a life of its own. It pulsates and it moves around. It can become a lot bigger and a lot smaller very, very quickly. It can be sort of soft and pliant, or it can be as hard as a sort of steel rod, and in such a case it can be used for mechanisms to levitate and move things around. But it's quite an interesting thing to see. But at the end of the day, we don't feel it's quite as evidential as you get with the new type of phenomena we developed and worked with at Scole, where it worked in a totally different way. For instance, we had solid spirit people walking around our room, up to sort of 8 or 10 of them on more than one occasion, and their bodies were either totally solid or partially solid. But it works in a different way, in that with energy, what was happening was that the spirit team built a portal on our central table for spirit personalities to come into the room, and all of us in this life and in the next life have what's known as a spiritual essence. Now, that is described as the soul by some people, and of course, sort of every living thing, or in fact everything, even a table or what have you, has a spiritual essence. And there was a very special experiment which was done for the skeptical scientists who came to sit with us, to prove to them that spiritual essence of other things exists. But getting back to the way that our materialized spirit people came to us is the fact that they were actually teleported through this through the portal that was there into the room. Now, when they were in the room, they were themselves. They were literally the spiritual essence of themselves. Initially, they're invisible, but mentally, they're able to draw on the creative energy which exists inside the glass dome, and by that, they're mentally able to sort of increase or decrease the density of their spirit body, their spiritual essence, so that they then become, when they increase the density totally, they become quite solid. It happens that they can do this mentally, and they don't have to do a full materialization of their spiritual essence. They can just materialize an arm and a hand whenever they want to do this. I mean, we did some demonstrations out in California, and whilst we were there, we had a lady who actually sat with us out in Los Angeles, and she had a spirit arm came to touch her, and all of our team said to anybody that happened to be there, well, if you touch, you can touch back. And she did, and she put her hand on this arm that was touching her and moved it up, and she found a shirt, and in fact there was also a jacket, and she moved her hand right up the arm till she got to the shoulder, and there she had a blooming shock, because there was nothing beyond the shoulder. It was fully animated, the arm, but there was nothing beyond that. And the reason for that is that spirit person had only chosen to become solid from the arm downwards, but the whole spirit essence was there. So in fact, it was done in this different way. So what we're talking about at Scole is unique and very much a pioneering experiment.
Absolutely. Now, I'm sorry, Mark. Go ahead.
Well, no, my question is, when these materializations would happen, were these the type of materializations you said they become quite solid? Was this something you could actually see with the naked eye? Whether a full form or a partial?
One of the first things they did when we started to get phenomena was to produce spirit lights. We had several different types of spirit lights which they experimented with for quite a while, and we had, the first spirit lights we got were actually very small, about the size of a sort of a 1 penny piece or a very small light, but it was very bright, and it would rush around the room all over the place. Very often they'd do, these little spirit lights would do aerobatics for us, and that in itself was quite interesting. But you found that when you had a solid spirit person present, they would very often hold a spirit light in their hand, firstly so you could see their hand and arm, and secondly so you could actually see, and they would hold it under their chin so you could see their face and that they were solid, and literally identify them, as many of our sitters were able to identify their own loved ones. But they're quite normal. The whole of them feels quite warm, quite normal, quite human. Nothing different from the way they were when they were alive. But other times there were sheets of spirit lighting. So what Spirit were trying to do with us, with the Spirit team, was actually to produce enough light for people who were present to be able to see these spirit people. And on many occasions they achieved that.
Now, Mr. Foy, if I could, these spirit people, are they necessarily the souls, for lack of a better word, of the departed people that used to be, on this plane, or are they substances from another dimension, a combination of both? What do you find in your research?
Well, eventually they were a combination of both, but that was right. That was in the later part of our experiment. And generally speaking, they were indeed the actual living spirit essences of the spirit people. So you actually had the actual spirit person there present with you, and they chose mentally to increase the density of their spiritual essence or their soul or their spirit body, so that it became quite solid.
Now, another an extension of this line of questioning, did you ever feel fear whenever these kind of manifestations were going on?
Never. In all the 43 years that I've been involved in this, I've never come across what you might call a bad spirit. And all we ever felt when they were present was an overcoming love situation. I mean, love is the key to everything in the spirit world anyway. But it was a physical thing with us. We could actually feel this wall of love coming from them.
Wow, that's incredible. Because to hear this and to read your research and read some of the findings that were as a result of these experiences being conducted, I would think that if I were in the room, I would be, just from a human standpoint, very afraid, because this is something unexplained going on. But these things seem to exude some sort of emotion of love into the entire room then?
Yes, they did. I mean, the feeling when one of these sessions was going on was fantastic.
Have you ever had the spirits from the other side actually verbalize to you? Is there an exchange of conversations?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've come across independent direct voice many times. There was a very, very famous medium called Leslie Flint. In the UK, in London. We sat with him about 25 times during his lifetime, and actually went to his funeral in the 1990s as well. And it's quite amazing. I mean, you were literally carrying on conversations for up to half an hour, even longer, with spirit people who spoke from midair. Right. With our own experiment,
he was an amazing person.
He was fantastic medium, Leslie. We got to know him quite well in the end. But we've had this in lots of other locations as well, with different physical mediums. But with us, we referred to these actually as energy voices. But we had one particular guy who learned to do this on a regular basis, and he was called Reg Lawrence. He'd been an engineer in his lifetime, but he was absolutely fantastic. And quite frequently we would have these energy voices speak to us from midair. There were 5 different types or 5 different ways that we were able to converse directly with the spirit people who came into our room and who worked with us. The first of these ways was deep trance. The 2 mediums we had working with us and sitting with us, both of them would go into deep trance when our sessions began, and would stay in deep trance for the whole of the sessions. And we've had sessions go up for as long as almost 3 hours on occasions. But they were in absolute deep trance. They knew absolutely nothing about it. They were totally out of it and totally asleep. But the conversations that used to go on between the spirit personalities and us were absolutely amazing. We had over 1,000 hours of pure phenomena and pure conversation between us and the spirit people over a 5-year period.
So this was a form of trance channeling then.
It was, yeah. But it was. I suppose it's term channeling these days, but we were only came across it, the idea of channeling, recently. Over in the UK, generally, it's been known as deep trance. But that was the first way, and then the second way was that we had a type of phenomena that became known as the extended voice. And what happened was that psychically, the vocal cords of the 2 mediums were extended away from their body, so that they could actually speak from places that were 25, 30 feet away from them, sometimes within the wall itself of the place. And that was just an extension of what they were doing with this deep trance. And then that that went extremely well for a while. But then they concentrated more on the independent energy voices, which I was just talking about. And they were able to converse with us directly via these energy voices coming from midair. And They could move for anything up to 20, 30 feet in a split second. But, sort of all the time, the mediums were there. We all had luminous wristbands on that were fastened with Velcro. So if anybody took one of those off, you would immediately know, obviously. But nobody ever moved from their place. And as I say, over 1,000 hours, we'd have been idiots if any one of us tried to pull any fraud at that time.
The spirit team, or the team in the spirit world that you worked with, I've heard of other researchers that have worked with teams like this, and it almost seems like you're working with a group of people that's almost in an identical situation and location to what you're working in, very much like their own physical version of whatever reality they're in, communicating, in a way similar to like radio, where you're sharing ideas over shortwave and helping each other. Did you ever get that kind of feeling, or do you feel like you were dealing with people who were like more advanced spiritually, or more higher ideas coming down? Was it more of a mutual collaboration, or more like you were receiving, higher information?
It was very much a mutual collaboration. The spirit team we got to know extremely well, and I think the best way to describe them is that over 5 years, they became very much like our extended family. We came to love them all extremely, extremely much over that period. And when the experiment finally finished, we actually went into a bereavement period ourselves because we were missing them so much. But that was the team that we were working with. However, there was a higher team that was actually directing the team that worked with us. So they were very much in a sort of higher area, if you like, and we very rarely got the opportunity to connect directly with them. But on occasions, we were able to have one of their members speak to us only when we were alone. We were never allowed that to happen when visitors came. But they became known as the Council of Communion, and the Council of Communion with the group that sort of, there were 13 of them, that oversaw our experiments and one or two other experiments. So we weren't the only people working with the Council of Communion, but they were the ones who made the big decisions that were then passed down through our own spirit team to work with us.
It almost sounds like you're dealing with people in another planet than you are dealing with the spirit world. I mean, in terms of, there's a lot of stigma when you talk to people and even mention the word spirit world, because people right away start thinking of, angels and heaven and love and light and a lot of new agey stuff. And yet at the same time, hearing what you're saying and what I've read about the experiment, it's people almost on an even level sharing ideas and information. Now, I am really interested in the higher group too. Who were they? Are they part of the human race? Are they part of higher level entities? I mean, did you ever get an idea of who they really were?
Yeah, I mean, we got the impression basically that they were very much higher souls who had gone a long, long time ago. And I'm talking in some cases, sort of thousands of years prior to our own life. But they were certainly very, very much, sort of elevated from the level that we were on. But those of the spirit team who were close to us and worked with us were very much like, as I say, an extended family. And we all worked together. In some instances, it was almost like going and having a bit of a party. With them sort of joshing us along. And I mean, they would joke with us. They would bring us a lot of evidence, and that was very, very vital. Evidence, personal evidence of the existence of an afterlife, of the after existence of our own people. But there were one or two instances where there was some fantastic evidence brought of an afterlife, because they were able to do it. So it varied very much, but there was more than one level. And you spoke about sort of other dimensions. Well, in the end, towards the end of our experiment, we were actually able to connect directly with other dimensions. And this came about because one of the communicators who was working with us was actually Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison communicated with us from the point of view that we had photographic experiments where a sealed film, 35 millimeter film, sealed in a box, was just simply put on our table before we sat, and at the end we would develop this film, which had never been exposed. It was purely and simply, shop wrapped, and when these films were developed afterwards, we found that there were all sorts of messages written on them, but on this particular film, Thomas Edison had actually put a message on there. He gave us a blueprint on that film of a little machine he wanted us to build, which he said would help our communication with them and with other dimensions. And we actually built this. It took an awful long time for the Spirit team to be able to communicate properly through this. But this little, it was about the size of a matchbox and contained a sliver of germanium, and it was built to his blueprint. And on that film also, he had signed his initials, TAE. And one of the SPR members, the scientists who eventually came to sit with us, got in touch with the Edison Institute in America and compared the signature, the TAE, on that film with a similar initial signature of Edison's from 1926, and it turned out to be totally identical. When gradually they worked with us with this little machine, which we called the TDC, standing for Trans-Dimensional Communication Device, the very first person to speak through it when they perfected it was Edison himself. And Edison spoke to us through this device, which was then linked into amplifiers. He spoke to us through this for 15 minutes personally, which was quite fantastic. But once this device got going, we were also able eventually to be in touch with other dimensions, literally. You would refer to them as ETs. But we had eventually, as well as being in touch with them, we actually had them teleported into the room on more than one occasion. And later they were able to put their images on video film when we had a video there. So we did actually link up with other dimensions. We also had a mini UFO that materialized and moved around the room, sitting in front of all the different sitters and just a few inches so we could examine it. And that in itself was extremely interesting.
I've seen some of the photographs, and the images look remarkably like what we would consider stereotypically the grays. Yes. So the UFO that materialized, was it solid? Was it something, from the same type of substance as these energies that you had seen manifest? What exactly was this craft that you were looking at?
It was a miniature UFO. I mean, it was very small, no more than about 6 inches long by about 5 inches wide, triangular in shape, and about 2 inches thick. But it actually had portholes that had lights on as it moved around the room, and it would actually sit in front of us, making a peculiar noise, rather like rattling matches in a box. At the same time. But I mean, it appeared, and then after a short while it disappeared.
Amazing. So the UFOs, the extraterrestrials, at least as far as your research is going, not so much from the stars, but from another dimension.
Most definitely. Well, some of them were definitely from geographical places in space. Others were not. So we had a variety of different people. Some, some of this was explained to us by our spirit team afterwards, but we were contacting in some cases people who had no bodies and had never had a human life or a solid life anywhere.
So these other beings, the beings that were not from the deceased, did you have a name for them? The ones that you from these higher powers that were these higher beings that were coming from another dimension? Do you have a name for those?
Well, we purely and simply call them, other dimensional beings. Stellar. They were also called stellar friends. That was our best way of describing them.
I see. And again, you felt no fear. You've only felt love from these beings as well.
Absolutely. In fact, you mentioned the picture that you've seen of the sort of grey, and in fact, this guy was blue on the pictures we received on the video, and he materialised. Actually, he was quite solid in the room. He stood in front of each of us. He took our hands in his hand and placed them on his head, so that we could feel he was not human. And this was a little guy, no more than about 4 feet, and with his hands, we could feel that his fingers were totally different to ours, longer, but less of them. There were sort of 3 or 4 fingers on the hand, and you could literally feel a wall of love coming from this little fella.
So, Robin, what are we to make of these other visitations by creatures looking remarkably similar to these ones that come into people's homes, and there's a negative aspect to them? What do you make of these kind of visitations?
Well, I mean, quite frankly, personally, I've never had a problem with any of this, because we've only ever come across people that are very pleasant and beneficial.
Right.
To me, it sounds like, you're putting out there of very positive thoughts. You're attracting those very positive types of beings to you. I think that, and again, this isn't all about UFO research, but, in a lot of ufology, if you go off of what other experiencers have mentioned, there's a lot of different types of beings out there, even variations of the Greys, who all have different agendas, and some of them don't have our best interests at heart. Some of them.
Yeah, I'm sure you may well be right, but of course I can only go from my own experience.
Now, the UFO that materialized in the room. How would you describe it? Did it look like a solid, like a metal type of object, or was it more like a glob of energy?
No, it was quite solid. Yeah, I mean, it was a dull metal, made of a dull metal, but I couldn't tell you what on earth it was made of, other than the fact that it flew around the room and sat in front of us so we could have a look at it.
That's incredible. Now these other interdimensional entities that you connected with, I think this is one of the things that that Ron was trying to ask is, did you have a way of differentiating between the different types of beings or different realities that you were communicating with? And how did you know that you maybe were talking to one reality compared to another?
Well, of course, we were getting a feedback all the time from our spirit team, who were cooperating with the beings that communicated with us.
So was it like they were... your spirit team was like giving you information as it was coming through to you, like a third party, or was it you're getting direct communication and then your spirit team would interject and work with you during this time?
Well, both, really. I mean, the thing was that there was communication coming from some of these other dimensional characters in English, but sounding very much like a robotic thing. Part and parcel of this little machine, TDC machine, that was built. We were told that there was an inbuilt property of this, which the spirit team referred to as an idolis system, And they called it that because they mentioned that it was an interdimensional oral language interpretation system. So basically what was happening, that these people were thinking into this because they couldn't, not all of them could communicate verbally. And it was coming out of a robotic English voice. So in that we were able to speak to them directly on a number of occasions.
The type of experiments that you all came up with, and you advanced over the number of years, I've heard of similarities, like with the photographs that showed the faces coming through on the photos. There was a famous gentleman. Now I can't remember his name. He was Greek, or it was in the 1950s. I remember that they used to he would take a camera and they'd take a flash of his face, and then when the picture was developed, there would be like someplace else in the world he was mentally projecting this, and it would come onto the photographs. They even tried that experiment once I remember with a television camera. They put it right up against his head, and next thing you know, you're seeing an image of somewhere in the world. The way those photos came through from the spirit world onto those unexposed film seems very similar. That type of a psychic projection.
Yes, I'm sure that there was a similarity there, but it was actually the thoughts of the spirit people that were being projected on there. I mean, we never did any of this, but the spirit team were doing it on our behalf.
Did they ever tell you why they were communicating with you? I mean, I understand from the human perspective, us wanting to communicate with the spirit world, proof that life exists beyond death, but they worked with you long enough and were working and trying to advance things. Did they ever tell you what their agenda was?
Basically, they wanted to prove to mankind that life existed after death. And that's what they were working towards. They wanted to produce more and more phenomena in full spirit light. They didn't want to introduce electric lighting into it, but the thing was, the spirit lighting was so good in many cases that it wasn't necessary. And they were working towards a situation where eventually the many spirit personalities would actually materialize in front of large audiences in the light. And the proof would be there. You can hardly refute what you can see with your own eyes.
Why do you think, since this happened all back in the 1990s, why do you think that it's not happening again now? Why there really doesn't seem to be a lot of people out there trying to work in this format? In fact, in my opinion, especially in the American paranormal research community, we've taken gigantic steps backwards. And become more primitive in how we look at the spirit world and trying to prove the spirit world. Now it's everybody running around in abandoned buildings, snapping pictures and recording audio.
But that's where the money is, isn't it?
It's not even the money. It's more of the thrill. Most people get into this for the thrill of, I had a paranormal experience. But it's not trying to prove anything of life after death. And yet I really don't know of anybody in the world today that is still continuing research on this level. What are your thoughts on that?
In fact, there are a lot of people who are working in this level at the moment and trying to develop physical phenomena in the same way that we had it, with energy. In fact, our spirit team actually produced a basic guide which was for other people to help them to get the phenomena. Many people, I'm talking about hundreds of people all over the world since then, have actually used this guide. And many of those are getting results. They're not coming forward necessarily and presenting those results to the public. Much of it is being done behind the curtains of their own homes.
And, and that could be also because a lot of it gets ridiculed at the moment because of all the way people are dealing with the paranormal, Mark.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's
like the UFOs. Everybody wants to know, but nobody really wants to know.
Yeah, everyone wants to stick with nuts and bolts craft and not look at the other. Even in the paranormal community, it's the same situation. Everybody's looking for the ghost of such and such who died tragically and now is haunting this location. And I still honestly feel that that's much more rare than anybody would realize. And we're dealing with other types of phenomenon, especially since. Robin, you were talking about with these contacting these other dimensions, and that is something that I'm very interested in my own research these days, because I'm beginning to feel that what we're dealing with a lot in the paranormal is more interdimensional. The spirit world is very much interconnected with other types of dimensions in existence. What would you say to that?
I would agree 100% with you. I'm absolutely sure that the spirit world is working side by side with the other dimensions. And I do know that at this particular time, with the world in such a mess as it is at the moment, both the spirit world and the other dimensions are rather worried as to how it's all going to turn out. And I think that's one of the reasons they're basically trying to work with us and help wherever they can. And that's why a lot of people are behind the scenes developing this, so that eventually, once they've developed their phenomena to such a degree, they can come out into the light and demonstrate it to those people who matter, such as the leaders of so many countries.
Speaking of that there, Robin, have you ever heard of any military involvement in developing any kind of techniques to reach out to the other side?
Yeah, I do know that it was happening to a certain extent in the States with the remote viewing programs. And I've heard of that, and also met people that have developed in that way with the remote viewing. But that hasn't been physical. That's been mental mediumship.
I see. With the spirit world, the dimensions that you had contacted, the ones that were exhibiting so much love, would they respond to a military type of regime that sets out to contact the spirit world, or would they just simply not pick up the phone?
I think you've got it there. They just wouldn't pick up the phone. If you don't have the right motivation and you don't have your right reasons for doing it, then they wouldn't work with you.
Well, here, and I'm going to throw this out there. Maybe that team wouldn't work, but and again, you had nothing but positive experiences, but there are, I do feel in a lot of some of these other dimensions anyway, these other realities, types of entities that maybe they would work with the government, because maybe, again, they have their own agendas working towards different goals. I mean, you hear about in the UFO in the United States, they talk about programs, secret black ops programs, where they have shared technology with some of these races, where we get the technology and our government supposedly lets these grays or whatever do what they want with the public, and it's all kept hush hush. So it's a possibility that there, even though you dealt with the very positive aspects of it, there might be more negative aspects out there that would deal with our government and deal in darker goals.
Well, it's a possibility, but as I say, I haven't come across it, and I don't believe, generally speaking, that there will be any alliances formed in that way between other dimensions and particular governments.
Well, that would be good if that was the case. I tend to look at the worst case scenario in knowing our government and some of the things that go on out there. So, yeah, I think we're going to take our first break, and then when we come back, we're going to be speaking more with our guest Robin Foy about the Scole Experiment. So don't go away. We'll be right back after these messages.
The message is, there are no messages.
And welcome back, everyone, to Paranormal UK Radio. I'm Mark Johnson with Irene Allen Block, and our guest tonight, we're really excited to be speaking with Robin Foy, who is one of the investigators and people who put together the Scole Experiment back in the 1990s. And now, Robin, The Scole Experiment, you all took that to some fairly incredible levels, not only there in the village of Scole, but you did some research with other researchers in, I believe, in Italy. You did some things out in the United States. Tell me how you expanded beyond the four of you in the room working, you and the psychics working with the team on the other side and working with some of these other people.
Well, the DVD that you were talking about earlier that was made gives a wrong impression, in that it gives the impression we were actually working with Marcello Bacci in Italy. And in fact, we never met him until after Scole had finished. And we were taken over there to listen to his phenomena, his direct radio voices. So that really shouldn't have been on the video, but it ended up there. But we did work in several different places. In actual fact, we were out in California, Los Angeles. We also did some work up in San Francisco. We worked in Ireland. We did demonstrating in Holland, demonstrating in Switzerland and in Germany, and on the island of Ibiza, with very, very good results indeed.
Now, in all this time, you also came under, I know that there was a lot of criticism and skepticism that your group put up with. And, you know, how did you and the group handle that? Because I know, let's face it, the skeptics can be incredibly harsh and be throwing words of hoax around left and right. How did that affect you in any way when you were doing the experiments?
It didn't affect any of us, basically, because, as I say, I've been involved in this type of research for 43 years. I've come across it so often in different areas, different mediums, different situations, and basically it's not worth responding to it. Just let it go. We do our thing. We know what's happening, and what happened at Scole was absolutely 100% genuine. There was no doubt about that. And when people say to me today, you've been involved in this for 43 years, you must believe in life after death now, I always say, no, I don't. And of course, they look a little bit askance then. But I just come back and simply say, well, I don't believe in it because I know it's true. And knowledge, there's a big difference between belief and knowledge. And that's really how to handle it. Just let them get on with their thing and we do our thing. There was a lot of skepticism by the three SPR scientists that came and sat with us on a regular basis for 2 years, because the SPR is well known. That's the Society for Psychical Research. It's well known for being extremely skeptical where physical mediumship, physical phenomena is concerned. But even those guys, after they'd sat with us 25, 30 times, produced a report for the SPR, which was called the Scole Report. And that is still actually available. It's around. But they looked at it in a much more scientific way and came to the conclusion that so much had happened in so many different ways that it was absolutely genuine.
With the scientific basis, and here's something that I'd like your opinion on it since you've worked on this for so long. My opinion has been changing about trying to obtain scientific proof, because in so many different ways I feel like we do not have the tools to absolutely prove any of this. We can have a lot of very interesting phenomenon happen, but you know, when it comes to hard science, we're never going to get the scientific community to support it or agree or even give it serious study because of the stigma between science and religion, and science in itself has become its own religion with its own dogma that you don't dare break or look outside the box in many cases. So do you feel that it's important to continue pushing a scientific-minded research, or is it better to just do your research, whether you can prove it scientifically or not, to keep that communication open and keeping information from flowing through from the other side?
Well, my own opinion is that we should continue to work along the scientific lines. And any future work which I might do, I shall continue along that vein, because I believe that the proof will be there eventually, in that materialized spirit people, solid spirit people, will be able to walk about in the light, whether it's natural light or whether it's spirit light, and in front of an audience. And I do feel that in some cases there will be opportunities for world leaders to meet up with people who have developed physical mediumship to the stage that it will allow those world leaders to converse with those who have gone before and whose opinions they will take seriously.
What I wanted to know, Robin. Oh, sorry.
No,
Mark.
go ahead. No, your turn. Go ahead.
The messages and puzzles, should I say, and everything that were imprinted on the films that were the 35mm films that were enclosed in the containers, never opened. Did you ever get to the bottom of some of those ones that look like ideograms and things?
Not every single one of them was solved, but we did have a few that were sort of left hanging around after the experiment had finished. But in most cases, a lot of that was left specifically for the 3 researchers stroke scientists that were sitting with us on a regular basis for them to solve. And in many cases, they did solve it.
And was there any amazing information that came from them?
Not really, but they did feel that as far as they were concerned, there'd been sufficient evidence for them to conclude that what had happened at Scole was totally genuine.
Oh, yeah, I know that. Yeah, because the Society of Physical Research said it was the best proof of the afterlife that they'd ever had.
That's right, yeah.
That's true. Sorry, Mark, you can carry on.
Oh, quite all right. The experiment came to an end, and did you continue other types of experiments after that, or did you feel like you had completed the research that you had set out to do?
No, we don't feel that we've completed the research at all. And in fact, we have met up with other physical mediums since. We have sat in sessions since that have backed up the work that was done at Scole, and we've been able to reconnect with Blue and with some of the others who were actually members of our spirit team through other physical mediums in a physical way. In other words, we've met them in a materialized form again since then, and we certainly haven't given up on any ideas of going forwards with the research. So, you know, we are looking at all sorts of avenues in that at this point in time.
Where do you see, or where would you like to take the research next? I mean, are you looking to just validate what you had worked with before, or do you have ideas for new directions that you want to go into?
I would like to see the work go well beyond what we achieved at Scole. I'd like to see it become more complete in the evidence that it produces.
So at the moment, you feel like you just tipped the iceberg.
Absolutely.
There's a lot more to be found out.
Well, Robin, let's go back a lot further beyond the Scole experiments. Let's talk about what got you into being fascinated with the paranormal and doing these experiments to begin with. You've been working on this for over 43 years. So what started your journey into researching the afterlife?
Well, basically, I was always interested in ghost stories as a child. My parents used to buy me the odd ghost book for Christmas. And you know, it always fascinated me. And funnily enough, whenever I went past, I'd never gone into a spirit church or a spiritualist church or what have you. And you know, what fascinated me when I would go past the local spiritualist church is that I would imagine all sorts of things flying around the room in there, So I always considered that phenomena was a part of what happened there, although it's not necessarily. And of course, I know since that it's very, very rare for phenomena to happen, and it doesn't just happen in spiritualist churches. It's usually done in private home circles behind the scenes. But I got to a stage where 43 years ago, I was looking at the possibilities of going further into it. And I picked up a local paper in Leicester in the UK, which had in the adverts, personal adverts, a sort of advert concerning a chap looking for psychic researchers, anybody interested in psychic researchers, and there was a box number there. And this advert, although I'd not, it wasn't in bold type, but it appeared to be in bold type to me. It seemed very, very prominent, and I actually decided I'd go for it. And I wrote to this guy, and he said, well, yeah, come along for an interview. I don't know if you know, but I run a physical circle. And so when we got along there, I think he interviewed about 8 to 10 of us. And there was only about 4 or 5 of us that actually ended up staying. But at the end there, he simply said, well, would you like to see the place where we sit? And the 5 of us sort of said, yeah, okay, that'd be very nice. He took us up the stairs towards this room that they sat in as a seance room. And as we were going up the stairs, the house that he lived in was a detached house, 100 yards from a house on either side, quite a distance, nothing behind the house, a long distance to the road in front. And as we started going up the stairs in a crocodile, we all heard quite clearly a baby crying. And of course, we looked at the room, and I commented on this to the guy that ran the circle. And he said, well, maybe that's spirit telling you something. And this baby crying came from midair. I know there was no babies anywhere around there, of course. And within a week, my first wife and I had actually applied to adopt. And we got a phone call saying, we have a child for you. So it was a message to me. And of course, I found that quite evidential. But when I got involved, I was taken into the circle. When I got involved in that circle, phenomena occurred. Some phenomena occurred there. And I just went on from there. I learned a little bit more about mental mediumship, but I've always been more interested in the physical mediumship side. I've started organizations to do with physical mediumship. And my wife and I have run several physical circles. And in some of those physical circles, we developed quite good phenomena. I mean, one of the things that happened to us regularly and still does to a certain extent is that we've had pets, such as dogs, that have been teleported through a solid brick wall. We now have a number of cats, and it's happened to some of them over here in Spain. So it's something that fascinated us because of course, you just don't consider that's a normal thing to happen. But it was happening to us quite frequently.
So you're saying that living creatures like the cats and dogs were able to move through solid walls?
Yeah. And the first time it happened, it was actually a hamster in a cage. Our daughter was in the kitchen, and we came down after a sitting, and the hamster had gone out of his cage, although it was locked, and we all sort of got down on our knees looking all over the place for this hamster, and couldn't see it at all. And then my wife Sandra stood in the kitchen and said, "Come on, spirit, if this is you, bring him back." And as she stood there, right in front of her, a light appeared and shimmered, and this light gradually got sort of stronger and stronger until it turned into the solid hamster. So again, they were demonstrating to us that they could do this. And that was the first time it happened with a hamster, and they've done it with cats and dogs since.
Go ahead.
Yeah, has an animal ever came through during any of these experiments? I mean, does the essence of animals live on after death as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've said before, love is the key to all this. And if you have pets that are loved, those pets survive 100%. If a pet is, if there's an animal that's a wild animal, then I think they simply go to a plane where wild animals, sort of are in their own environment in the spirit world.
A kind of like an Elysian Fields type of thing, where the continuation, like life cannot be destroyed in any way. The energy still has to go someplace, and it seems to go to a place that is the same but different in a way that it's almost like before a fall of man. It seems like some sort of Eden that you're talking about.
Yeah, indeed, I think this is the case. I mean, we like to think of them as different dimensions. I've never subscribed to the idea of heaven being this wonderful place that we all go to where we sit on a cloud and play a harp. I think there are all these different dimensions, and you're drawn to sort of similar personalities in a particular dimension, but everything has a spiritual essence, even an inanimate object like a table. And the spirit team during our sessions did one experiment that proved virtually conclusively to the 3 SPR scientists that sat with us that they were telling the truth and all this was genuine. And it was an experiment they did with a crystal, quite a sizable crystal actually, that was sitting on our central table. There was a dish, a Pyrex dish that was also sitting on the table at the time. And these 3 scientists were sitting with us there. There was a spirit light that went into this crystal, this large crystal. It was levitated by itself. We all saw this happening and placed into the bowl in front of us all. And one by one, the scientists were asked to pick up this crystal. Continued to be self-luminous with a spirit light inside it, and one by one they picked up this crystal, and then they were told one by one to put it back into the bowl, which they did, and then a few seconds really afterwards they were told to pick it up again one by one, and each and every one of them, nothing had changed to our vision. It was identical to the way it had been previously, but each and every one of them, as they tried to pick it up, their fingers simply went through it. So it was visually, it appeared to be identical to the way it had been before, but in reality, it had been reduced to the spiritual essence of the crystal, and this was how they were trying to tell us that each and every one of us and everything inanimate has this spiritual essence. In our case, it's referred to generally as the soul, but it's there all the time. And of course, when these guys tried again, a few moments later to pick up the crystal again, it was back to normal and quite solid. So, but that was the one experiment that convinced these skeptical scientists that it was all 100% genuine.
I'm a student of Carl Jung, and I'm sure that you are as well too. And so when we deal with the things of the collective unconscious, and we see that there's so many archetypes around the world, so many different cultures, so many different languages of the same idea and the same notion of an afterlife. How did this become an archetype? Do you think that there were revelations to our ancient ancestors through these same type of beings? Has this always been going on? Did ancient man from the time of the pyramids or even from the Pleistocene, did they have an awareness of this other world? And if they did, where did it come from?
I would say absolutely 100% that's correct, and that it's gone back from time immemorial. As far as where it came from, I'm absolutely certain that beings from other dimensions interacted with humanoids on Earth. And basically that's how the knowledge came to them. But I think the knowledge has been there right from the very beginning, but it's been lost between different eras.
Whenever you're talking about your research, it takes me back to the first time I read Plato's Republic, whenever we have the idea of the cave allegory, whenever we can only see flicker of shadows on the wall, and it's not until we actually turn around and we can actually see the reality. So to me, as we're talking, and I'm utterly fascinated by everything that you have to say, it seems to me that there has been revelations throughout the entirety of human evolution, if you will, and you are just a continuation into those revelations.
I'm absolutely sure of it. I mean, I subscribe to the idea of multiple lives, and so that, sort of reincarnation, I think, exists. And I'm pretty sure that my wife and I have both reincarnated many times, as have quite a lot of the spirit personalities that worked with us at Scole, because they always told us, specific spirit personalities told us that they were contacting with us because we were from the same source, and that same source goes back ions in time.
I see. Kind of like the same type of a spiritual tribe or some sort of, spiritual family that there's really no end or any beginning to it.
I think that's exactly it. And I think the thing is that, if you have a connection into a group of spirits, that seems to stay forever because of life never ends. We all continue with our existence. And as far as the spirit team were concerned, and we're concerned, I think we're sort of I just think that we've sort of known all along right from the beginning, but in between the lives you forget it all, so you have to go back to scratch.
I see. Now, whenever we talk about physical mediums, and I wanted to ask this question a few minutes ago, but the conversation went on another tangent, which I was absolutely engrossed by. But you discussed that there was a man, I believe, in Germany who was a great physical medium in regard to ectoplasm. Is that correct? That was about an hour ago, I guess.
That's right. Yeah, it's correct, and he's a great friend of mine. Yeah.
Now, do you find it odd that men are better physical mediums or women? How do you see the relation between men and women? Because I know during the Victorian age, especially in America, men who were professed physical mediums were always looked on in a different light. They were sometimes even denigrated. It always seemed to be a woman's role. How do you find the differentiation between the sexes in regard to physical mediumship?
Well, really, I don't think there's very much difference. I mean, I've come across women physical mediums. Some of them have been very great, like Helen Duncan. And I've come across male physical mediums. I do find that sometimes male physical mediums tend to lean a little bit towards homosexuality, which I think because that makes them more sensitive, that they are able to sort of link in easier than some other people.
Possibly because they're tapping into that feminine energy. You're dealing with masculine and feminine energies, possibly that feminine energy. I think
that's exactly what we're saying, yes. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. I'm sorry, Ron, continue.
That's one of the things that I'm looking into right now as a researcher. And Mark, you talked about your research as well. I like to deal with Jungian psychology in almost anything that I deal with, because I do believe there's an interconnection to everything, whether it's UFOs or the realm of the fairy world or cryptids or the afterlife, ghosts. It seems that they come from the same type of substance. They come from another another dimension that's just right beyond our knowledge or tangible reality. It's right beyond our reach. But I've always also been fascinated by the different reactions that women have in regards to the paranormal than men, because it does seem that there is a different reaction to a woman than to a man. And I didn't know if it was caused by the nature, some sort of aggression that men sometimes put off, or if women are just simply more open to the idea of another world.
I mean, yeah, I would agree that the women do tend to lean more towards paranormal, sort of information and demonstrations than men do. But having found so many sort of men in the past that exude excellent physical phenomena, I find that gradually more and more men are coming into it and are developing. I mean, this if anybody wanted to download the basic guide that our spirit team sort of brought for us, in fact, they dictated the whole thing, about 70 pages. They can find it on www.scoleexperiment.com, which sort of it's very small price, which pays for our website. But lots of people have used that book, and lots of people are now getting physical results from it.
Very interesting.
So the instructions in the Scole Experiment book is what you said?
Yeah, it's it says exactly what you need to do to start and to run a circle and to get good results.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, I was just looking, because this is something I think we may even look into ourselves moving forward, and I was going to ask you about those instructions anyway, because it's really, really fascinating. I feel that I think we need more people pushing forward in this type of research. Again, right now with paranormal and pop culture, and here in America with Halloween, there's so many of these different paranormal shows, and even the ones that that are my guilty pleasures that I'll watch, like Ghost Adventures, and the show it's so ridiculous in their approach and how they're trying to supposedly research the paranormal. It's not research. It's going and having thrills and then running and screaming or having bad negative experiences, because that's what they're bringing into it with them.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a shame in many ways, that they're not, that you don't find too many people that are sort of serious about the research.
Robin,
yeah,
I want to ask you a question. Obviously, when you were doing all this, you asked questions of your spirit team and one thing and another. But did you ever ask the basic question of what is the concept of the ghosts that we see today?
Yes, indeed. And I mean, it's emerged within me over the years as well. A ghost is something totally different from a spirit personality. And generally, this is a rerun of a video situation in many instances that's actually left on the ether. For instance, if you have a big battle for many, many years afterwards, and even today, from battles that occurred in the 15th and 16th century, around a battlefield, you get noises and particular ghostly things going on. Sort of this is something that is purely and simply where an emotion is left on the ether round about the time of someone's death, and the ghost is simply that. It is a visual video image, if you like, that appears and does exactly the same thing over and over again. Where we used to live at Scole, there were 3 ghosts actually in the house. One of those was actually a dog, an Irish wolfhound, that used to run up and down the corridors all the time. Now, that was a spirit dog and not a ghost as such. We also had a dairymaid um, because it was a farm in the old days, that we saw from time to time peeping around the corner, and we referred to her as Dot. She got that nickname. And the third one that we had there was a ghost, in that the proceedings that happened every time you saw this guy were repetitive. He would walk up the drive, past the windows in full light, and could be seen by each and everybody that was there. And then when we went to the back door to open the back door and see who was calling, there was nobody there. But that was repetitive. Every single time you saw this guy, it was a replay of a video, and it happened the same way over and over again. Now, that's what I would refer to as a ghost.
So they said that obviously residual energy, which is a ghost, but they also did talk about spirits that actually walk.
Oh, of course. I mean, as I said, we had two actually in the farmhouse living with us there, but they were spirits. And because of the work we were doing, our spirit team were able to interact with them so that eventually they went on their way. But the ghost of the guy that used to walk up the drive stayed. It remained.
Yeah, but they just keep replaying until they sort of burn themselves out over years, don't they?
That's it, exactly. Yes. Yeah,
I understand.
In those that over here in the States we refer to as a residual haunting, which here they differentiate between an actual ghost being a spirit still on the physical plane that's intelligent, can interact, where a residual is like the recording you mentioned. Now, in these cases, and this is something that Irene and I have talked about many times in our research, even then, when you see these things, what would cause this type of phenomenon? And I tend to lean towards it being interdimensional, where a lot of U.S. ghost hunters claim, well, it's because there was a traumatic event and it imprinted itself into the rock, or because there's granite in the ground, or whatever, crystals, and then that energy repeats and repeats, and that never made any sense to me. But what does make sense is if you look at how time is not linear, and even physics is proving this with string theory and other advances in theories, that all time is happening at once. It's only our perception of time that's moving linearly. So it seems to me that sometimes what we think of as these residual ghosts might actually be a form of time loop, where different times, 2 points in time, suddenly merge, and even in a pattern can merge, and you're seeing an event play out over and over again, but it's actually a past event. I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with you. There is absolutely no time whatsoever in the spirit world, and consequently, I think you're absolutely right in this business about being a sort of a string theory. There is that you can link from one time straight into another.
What about times when people think that they've seen ghosts? And this is we've brought this up on a few shows, and I like to get other people's opinions on it. Where, let's say you see a spirit of a human being dressed in period clothing. It's not a residual haunting. In fact, there are times when people report that the spirit turns and looks right at them and reacts to seeing them as well. Now,
he's talking about something that happened to me, Robin, several times.
You and several other people that I've heard the story of. And so my question is, again, if we look at the time slip theory, are you looking at the spirit of a person that is died and is still floating around in our present reality and we can see them occasionally, or are we dealing with a dimensional time shift where for a very brief second, whatever the conditions happen to be, that two very much living, breathing human beings can suddenly see or interact through a thinning of that time barrier? And so you're not one person seeing a dead person, two live people that just happen to be able to see each other through the right conditions in the space-time continuum. What do you think?
I would lean more towards the time slip. And as this has happened to you, Irene, as well, it's something that happened to Sandra and I once in a while. Prior to living at Scole, we spent 2 years living in a rectory next door to a church in Norfolk. And on a couple of occasions, we actually saw the old rector wandering through a gate towards the rectory. And he would look at us on occasion, stand still and look at us. And that very much is a sort of time slip, I think.
Yeah, it happens to me quite often, Robin. It's become more or less a normal daily basis where I kind of time shift or time slip into some other sort of reality. And when I do see somebody, the shock, obviously I'm looking at them with shock on my face. They're looking back as if to say, who the hell are you?
That's right. I mean, I actually know somebody that stayed in an inn that doesn't exist anymore. On one occasion, on a very foggy night, they actually came across an inn, went in to stay in there, thought it was rather funny because all these characters were in period costume, and actually stayed overnight there. And when they left in the morning, it was still quite normal. They thought it was a bit funny because they didn't want to charge much. And they went away and then sort of tried to bring somebody back also to see it, to stay in it a few weeks later, and it had gone, it had disappeared.
Yeah.
So there has to be this time slip possibility.
Yeah, there definitely has to be. But the point is, when it happens to me, it's like I know everything about that person. It's like all of a sudden I know who they are, what they are, and everything about them. And maybe they know about me, I don't know. But we are complete strangers, never seen each other before. And both of us are shocked as if to say, well, who the hell are you? But I come out of it and I've sort of absorbed information about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's crazy. So staying in a time slip in, I'd like to try that. I would. So
would I.
I really like that.
I would too, but I would be afraid that they would charge the credit card in a weird way, and then I would be paying out the wazoo. The exchange rate on the other side might not be very conducive to traveling.
Not very good in Spain at the moment either.
There's a story. Mark knows a story of somebody that travelled on an aeroplane. Tell Robin about that, Mark. That was great, that story.
Which, now you have me as a
the one where the country did not exist.
Oh, yes. It's back in the 1950s. There was a story in Tokyo, Japan, where this gentleman got off a plane, went to customs, had his passport, and they held him in customs. He was from Europe, but he had a passport from a country that did not exist. And he had currency from this country that did not exist. And he was really upset. The Japanese officials were very confused. They couldn't figure anything out. They brought out a map. He pointed to where his country was supposed to be, which was like a section up towards the northeastern section of France, but there was no country there. And he was upset and baffled. They didn't know what to do with him. So they put him up in a hotel room until they could try to figure out what happened. They put guards on his room to keep him from leaving. And then the next morning when they went to go talk to him, he and all of his possessions were gone.
Oh boy.
Like he didn't even exist. And the theory is that he actually slipped in from one of these alternate realities.
That's right. Parallel world, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that is very interesting because history is littered with all these anecdotal reports of, islands that would be there one day and gone the next, and the idea of even Shangri-La, these places that are hidden away in the mountains and they're only shown every now and then. this does also speak of alternative realities and the two type of dimensions bleeding into one another from time to time. Does it not?
Touch of the Brigadoon, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, Brigadoon, that's right. In Scotland, right? I believe his words that. Now, the idea also of people, like Mark was talking about, there are interesting hints throughout the historical record of people being in places where they shouldn't be. That one gentleman that he spoke about showing up in Japan. There was also people, being reported of walking down a road in England one day and showing up in Australia the next. There have been reports about that through history, but they're also tantalizing evidence of the green children from Woolpit. If you know that story, my friend, about people that just seem to be completely out of time and out of place, not being able to speak the language, not being able to speak or eat the food. What does this have to say with the idea of alternate realities, and how would this tie in to your experiments as well, if it does at all?
I mean, it's totally fascinating, but I don't think that would sort of be included anywhere in the type of research we do.
Right. But the type of research that you do is so fascinating because you can take the raw data that you have already compiled and actually apply it to other fields, which is the reason that I do like the idea that you are following a scientific method and doing it in a scientific way. Now, what Mark said about not really applying science so concretely, because science really doesn't fit into every parameter. But if you're going to be scrutinized, you're going to be scrutinized by science. So I have a tendency to make all my research as scientific as possible, because at the end of the day, that's the way you're going to be judged.
Exactly. And that's the way we would actually want to be judged. Right. And I do think that in Scole we were lucky in a way that we had three initial scientists came to work with us who were skeptical in the beginning and went away totally convinced. And I would like to follow that really through any research that I do in the future.
Right. So we can take the tabulated data and apply it to the field of, UFO research or the field of, psychic phenomena, because it is there. It is the same way if you were going to a scientific journal and taking something on, bacteria and applying it to your field. So I think what you've done at Scole is you've provided a lot of future researchers with a great baseline of evidence and numbers and figures to work with.
Indeed, we feel that we've done that, and if we never manage to get anything else again, I think we've achieved something quite fantastic there.
I agree.
How did you know that your experiment had come to an end? Did they tell you on the other side, okay, that's it? Did you just feel like you reached a natural conclusion? I mean, what brought it to an end?
No, it was stopped. Not actually by the spirit world in the end. What happened was that for the last half a dozen sittings, we were being told, firstly by the spirit team, that there was interference from our own future. So time slip again. And it worked out that lost the word for it. The portal that they had produced was supposed to allow us to go as far into the future and pass through as possibly 2004, 2005. What had actually happened was that the portal was too wide as they expanded it, so the portal would have actually taken us and other people from our future as far as 2120. Which is an awful long time in the future. And what was happening was that when we sat to try and speak to our spirit team, communicate with them, there was a group, quite a normal group, nobody trying to harm us or anything else, was actually trying to connect with us each and every time that we sat together. And these people were from as far ahead as 2120. And eventually, what happened was that we got this screeching, which turned out to be a sort of noise from crystals that prevented our mediums from going into trance anyway. And within the space of about 3 weeks, we literally lost contact with our spirit team. Then we had a character who called himself Varan Herik. He didn't speak English, but we thought in the end that he probably was some sort of a Time Lord or whatever, a Lord of the Cosmos.
It was the Doctor.
Actually came. Sorry.
It was the Doctor. Doctor Who?
No, not him. No, okay. This guy was calling himself Varan Herik. He was from another dimension. He wasn't actually a spirit personality as such. And he was the one that shut it down. He told us eventually we'd lost contact totally with our spirit team. First time he spoke to us, and this was on video. We were getting him speaking directly to us through the transdimensional communication device plugged into the video camera. So we were getting video of him to a certain extent, his outline and him moving around as he spoke to us. And he said, look, we're going to try and overcome this. And then within the space of the next 3 sittings, he came eventually to say, we're awfully sorry. You've done a lot of good work, but we have to close the door totally. We can't allow people from 2120 to communicate with you. So end of story. And it was just shut down. And that way, because we lost contact like this, it was like losing the whole of our family in one go. The sense of bereavement was awful at that time. But we have managed to connect with some of them since.
And that was going to be my next question is, since that communication got cut off, have you attempted to try similar experiments? Now, you mentioned you've worked with other mediums and other people where some of these former team members you worked with were coming through. But have you ever tried something on the scale of what you were doing back in the 1990s? So
far, no. But that doesn't mean to say we won't in the future.
And if you do, do you have plans in the future to do something like this? Or is it something you just feel content to leave that chapter closed for now unless you feel the draw to come back to it?
We have plans.
Okay. You'll leave it at that. I know that tone.
He's not giving too much away, is he?
I know that tone all too well. It's like, yeah, okay, there's something there. Now shut up. Got it. Understood. Now, I have to, we have a few minutes left in the program here, and I'd like to talk a little bit just about some of the other types of phenomenon that you were able to record. You mentioned, and I found this fascinating, about the crystal that people would try to reach in and grab, and it was such where they couldn't grab it. You also had a lot of things, and I forget what's the name of the term where objects would appear and drop
apports.
in. Apports, yes.
Apports, yeah. We had over 100 apports altogether throughout the course of the experiments. Some of them were quite bizarre in a way, in that our spirit team wanted to bring us something that would help us connect into the spirit team. So they actually apported a certain amount of what appeared to be sort of grey dust, a little bit like the stuff that Sai Baba was able to exude, and we assumed that perhaps it was something spiritual like that. And of course, the first thing we did was to sort of wet our fingers, sort of just taste it, and then we discovered later on that it was actually the ashes of an Indian spiritual man that had died and been cremated.
Oh.
we were a little bit nonplussed by that, but we opened the ash at night time as they suggested, and actually it did allow us to connect closer with them. Also, we had another little apport that was very tiny, like a marble, really, a very small marble, that didn't come from this Earth. It came from elsewhere in the universe. And we still have that, but it's too small to allow anybody to test it.
Yeah, no, you don't really want that being tested, do you?
Another thing we had was one day before we went to sit, we'd been looking at the television and we were watching a program about chimpanzees, and went downstairs, had our sitting, and none of the people that were present that came to the sitting had been there at that time. And as we went down there, we hadn't been sitting long when there was a massive bang on the central table, like a house brick landing there. And then when we looked afterwards, it was a little wooden carving of a monkey, which we thought was quite amusing since we'd been watching a program on television about them.
So they were having a tease with you then?
Absolutely.
Letting you know that they know what you're up to and what you're, what you're thinking and doing and things like that. That's amazing.
They apported a rather nice crystal cluster as well, and that was brought for us as a travelling crystal, because when we went abroad to work, we couldn't really take the glass dome. You imagine on an aircraft, it's likely to get broken, quite delicate. So they said, well, look, we'll apport this for you. And it was a lovely little crystal cluster, which we still have. And we had to take that with us, leave the dome at Scole, take this little crystal cluster with us. And whenever we sat anywhere in the world, we sat it in the centre of the table. And the idea that the spirit team stated that what they were doing, they were still collecting the creative energy into the dome in Scole, then beaming it all the way across the world to that crystal cluster and using it from there to do the phenomena.
Wow, that's amazing. And I'm really envious of you, Robin, because you're getting all these nice things. The only apports I ever get in this house are stones being thrown at me.
Oh, boy.
They always miss, but quite often out in the hallway,
Poltergeist,
suddenly, suddenly a stone go bang.
I will say that I did in a case here in the U.S. in New Jersey once where quarters, which is 25-cent pieces, kept dropping out of thin air right in the middle of a group of us. So I was sitting there looking, okay, gold pieces now? Any gold or silver you want to drop? Go ahead.
We were all in the kitchen one day talking, quite a few of us, and this one stone actually came through the ceiling and dropped down behind me, slid down the radiator that I was leaning against and landed on the floor as it came out. And I was so bloody annoyed because it wasn't anything really nice, another stone. That's all I get.
There is two things about the teleportation, even with the apports, even when you talked about the animals going through the walls. Two things come immediately to mind. In the UFO phenomenon, where people who are abductees or experiencers, they talk about how these beings come through the walls and will even take them and teleport them through walls, ceilings, windows. And so if they're being manipulated, their energy is being manipulated as such to go through these solid objects. There's also there's a gentleman also here in the U.S. Now, again, he doesn't have any physical proof, but he does have a very fascinating story, Andrew DiBasciago, who claims he was part of the MK Ultra program as a child back in the 1970s, and one of the things that they were experimenting with was teleportation, and it was based on Nikola Tesla's theories of electricity and magnetism that they were able to travel through. And I didn't know if you were familiar with that type of phenomenon as well.
Well, certainly, I've come across an awful lot of stories about it. And of course, the actual Philadelphia experiment that occurred was a good example of that, where electrical wires had been passed around a ship and the whole ship disappeared and ended up somewhere else. But it can be done if you have the right technology. And as I said before, I think really what's happened is that we've lost this over all the eons of time since this information was given to us, and we'd probably actually been in the habit of using it regularly in the past. We've lost it in between the lives. It has to be learnt again, and the only way you can learn it is basically by liaison with spirit and with other dimensions.
Well, we are actually coming up on the end of the program here. So, Robin, tell us again the name of the book, where people can get that, and also the website where they can look at more of your work.
Yeah, well, it's the basic guide is actually about 70 pages long. It just costs €10, and you can get that on the site www.scoleexperiment.com. And also on that site, if you wanted, I have a book called Witnessing the Impossible, which is currently at a sale price there for anyone that wants to read the whole story of Scole. It's written like a diary about every single sitting of the Scole Experimental Group. And it's the only book in the world that has every single sitting there, and everything is recorded in that book.
Fantastic.
I do have a website, but it's likely to go down shortly because we'll be changing it to another name.
Okay. Well, Robin, thank you so much for coming on the program tonight and talking with us about this. This has been utterly riveting.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, don't go away, Robin. Not yet.
We'll talk to you after the show.
All right.
Ron, thank you also for participating with us, and thank you.
Hey, thank you very much for having me. I was a passionate fan tonight. I was just sitting back and listening most of the show because I was so taken by you, Robin. Thank you so much for sharing.
No, you're welcome. Yes.
Yes,
And-
absolutely amazing.
And thank you to our listeners for listening to another episode of Paranormal UK Radio. And we will catch you all next week. You can always catch our podcasts on Podbean, Stitcher, and iTunes every week. So thank you very much, and everybody, and we'll catch you next week.
Okay, that's a wrap. Bye-bye, everyone.